Hey, how's it going everyone? Today we're going to talk about a lot of important information regarding Diablo 4 Season 2 info, leaderboards, World Tier 5 information, and even some in-game Battle Pass and a lot more information within this video. I do want to say again, I have posted my frustration as many other, content creators have, and yeah, the game does have its downfall, but I've always been optimistic about the future of Diablo, even though others have not. So with that being said, I think a lot of you are going to find this information either helpful or you're just going to be like, ah man, they could have done better. And so we'll find out by the end of this video, and if you do have any questions, let me know by the end. Let's talk about all this right now. What we're going to talk about first has to do with some of the things that have been found in Diablo 3 and Immortal and might be making its way towards Diablo 4. We can see right here, this article is 4players.de. All credit to them. There's 3 different questions here, and this was translated, so it might be a little bit rough around the edges. We can see it says Diablo 4. These 3 questions interest us: burning, new class, test server, and solo self-found. The first question is quite interesting because it has to do with the Blood Knight that was introduced in Diablo Immortal this year. The interviewer wanted to know why this was not included in Diablo 4, especially because of the recent Season of Blood that was announced, and honestly it's a good question. Rod Ferguson responded with, Diablo 4 and Diablo Immortal are 2 very different games with 2 very different teams and 2 different technologies. So it's more of a coincidence that the team had this type of vampire. It kind of adjusted over time, but no, the Blood Knight will not appear in Diablo 4. And so there you have it. That's the confirmation that this is not going to be the next newest class because of the technology, although there is a possibility that it could happen because things can change. I'm sure they got something else cooking though. The second question that was asked had to do with introducing test servers for the future updates, which is not a bad idea because this was actually something that was in Diablo 3, and well, 2 of the developers responded. Chris said, basically there are no plans to deploy future updates in advance via test servers. In Diablo 4, we try to work on new content through community engagement and feedback. Rod replies back with, yes, the PTR is interesting, but it also presents challenges in terms of development time, balance, and what you reveal. It's something we're very aware of because we've tried it in other games. We've heard the feedback, but we're still looking at ways to streamline this feedback loop, and that may or may not be part of it in the future. So it appears that there's not going to be any sort of test servers in the future, which is going to be interesting because I'm sure a lot of you out here would have liked that. It sort of reminds me of how Bethesda did that stuff too at one time, and I'm sure they're not the first either to do that. So, but that's really interesting, and it's not going to happen though in Diablo 4. And the last question was the solo self-found mode, and the developers responded with, quote, it took us 10 years to put that in Diablo 3. One of the nice things about the other installments in the series is that we can look back and see what worked. And even Immortal has interesting things that they do in the game, so we never say never, but we always have different priorities at different times. And the only thing that I really want to comment on here is that it's wild that that took 10 years for them to develop that and put that into Diablo 3. I'm not too sure if that's something that's like, oh, whoa, we put a lot of effort into it, or hey, we probably should have done that a lot sooner. I'm not too sure how it really works with this because I'm not a developer, so I'm just gonna kind of just put my 2 cents and leave. Continuing on, we're gonna talk about another article that was able to interview these developers, and this was during Gamescom. All of this. This next one is over here at screenrant.com. The article is called Diablo 4 Developers on Upcoming Season of Blood's Power Fantasy. There was a lot of things that were talked about within this that was quite interesting. The end is what I really want to talk about because it has to do with the 5 new bosses, and Rod Ferguson responded with, oh, absolutely, do you want to talk about it? And then Chris Wilson, the other developer, says, yeah, so as part of the Season 2, we're going to have 5 new boss encounters that players in later stages, as you start to level up level 50 to 100, you'll have the touch points where it's going to really test your build, test your character's power. And so staggered throughout the progression from 50 to 100, you can essentially farm these new bosses for an opportunity to get rare drops like uniques. Now, Wilson does continue on with saying that this right here is something that they really wanted to introduce because basically a lot of players have said something about, how ultra uber unique items are hard to get. So how can they make it easier, or at least, a better way to acquire it? And so they're going to do this with the bosses. Then Rod Ferguson chimes in to basically talk about how it's not like Diablo 2 where you would go in, take the boss out, pop out, come back in, take the boss out again. He then goes on to say, so the notion of the way that some of the 5 work is that they actually rely on each other to be able to be summoned into the world. So you actually have to work to be able to summon one of these bosses and to be able to farm an uber unique. So it adds even more gameplay to it. So it's not just about, I'm going to keep cranking on this boss over and over. Actually, there's a sequence of steps to be able to summon them, so you'll be able to take them on and go after that unique. And yeah, that whole entire translation was pretty rough there at the end. Essentially what's going to happen, from what I understand, is that there's certain ways to trigger these bosses, and it's like a certain sequence, right, from what he says. I don't know if that's going to be a good thing or necessarily a bad thing. Essentially, it could be if it's going to be something that's lengthy to get, but it might be a rewarding experience, especially if you have a higher chance at those uber unique items. Now, there is a little bit more context, I guess, that they kind of reveal in another article that can be found over at gamezoom.net. The first question that was asked within this article was basically about the development of Diablo 4, regarding towards server stability, bugs, glitches, pretty much everything above that you can really think. And one of the developers responded with, very positive, the staggered start helped a lot to relieve the server. The second question had to do with what us players can expect in Season 2. The developer responded with, Season 2 will have a vampire theme, you will hunt vampires and collect their powers, there will be 5 bosses, each stronger than the one before. And again, it's just a little bit of context to kind of give you an idea. They're going to each gradually become stronger and stronger. The third question might interest you, especially if you play Overwatch 2 or World of Warcraft, because this question had to do whether or not there will be some sort of crossover event for Diablo 4. The developer responded back with, nothing official, but you should look towards Scary Month. I'm guessing that's sort of a hint that some sort of crossover event will be happening for Diablo 4, and I can only imagine what it will be. Maybe it won't be for these games, but maybe for something else. I'm interested. The last 2 questions had to do with pretty much what we talked about before, why the Blood Knight is not included in Diablo 4, and will it be included at a later point. They responded with, there's pretty much, they're not going to do anything. Both games are going to remain unique in their own ways, what they say, and I definitely believe it. And the last question had to do with the expansion, and obviously they're not going to reveal anything at this moment, and they pretty much said, quote, no information at this moment. At the moment, you want to focus on the next season. And I definitely believe it. This is going to take time, especially when it comes down to the expansion. I wouldn't expect them to plop that out so fast, especially with all the issues that they're trying to fix currently. It just won't happen. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the article that was able to interview the developers, and this is rockpapershotgun.com. They interviewed Rod Ferguson, and they talked about this yesterday in a farming video at the end. But what this has to do is pretty much they talked about how they realized how badly they messed up and how they need to pretty much do a better job. Rod Ferguson said right here, quote, the resulting backlash was definitely educational. That was when we realized we need to be more proactive and more managing expectations. They go on later on within this post to say, quote, it's going to be really interesting as we transition to Season 2 and we see how players play with that, the new mechanics, and the richer in-game. And then even as we go into Season 3 with leaderboards, how will that change the in-game there as well? This is what Rod Ferguson has said, and pretty much it goes on a little bit more with, quote, as we start to better understand the different types of players, we want to make sure we're servicing all of them, season after season, and this is what Wilson said. He also adds on to say, it may not all happen in Season 2, but in time we're going to find a way to make sure that the completionist or the explorer or the competitive players are all being fed, essentially, and getting what excites them as a player. And what's interesting is that if we kind of go back a few within this article, what you're going to hear next, you're going to understand why Season 1 was the way it was. So with that being said, quote, "The big thing for us is Season 1 was basically developed at the same time we were shipping the game. So we didn't really, other than the open beta feedback, we didn't have a lot of feedback to go on into Season 1. Having the preseason gave some feedback for Season 1, but having the preseason and Season 1 really helped to inform Season 2. And all I want to say here is that when it comes down to this, shouldn't they have just kind of went back and said, how did Diablo 3 season go? Did it go well here? Did it go bad there? And of course there are newer players, right, to the Diablo franchise, and so things may just become a different situation there, and everyone's different when it comes down to what they like in a season pass. But I think equally we all can come together and say that Season 1 was the worst season so far that they've released. I mean, obviously it's the first one, but if the next one takes the cake, then that will take the place. For now, it seems that they're gonna try something different and take sort of different feedbacks. I'm interested in what you all think about everything that we talked about in today's video. I think it's going to be interesting to see how things actually turn out for Diablo 4. It's just been a wild time. I honestly think that the developers over at Blizzard still have it in them to make a wild game that's well worth, your money still. And I think they're gonna definitely develop a really stellar Season 2. I'm being positive, obviously I don't know much. From what they're saying and what they have stated in a lot of these interviews, is that they're going to really take apart of like certain things that they did wrong and try to fix it and do better. And if they're willing to say that, and I know a lot of developers say a lot of things, I'm willing to give them, the benefit of the doubt and say that they're definitely going to try their best, and I think they're going to develop a really good season. There's going to be some great bosses that we're going to be able to fight, and I think a lot of you are going to change your perspective. I'm not saying that Path of Exile 2 is going to be, a crap game, because obviously that game looks phenomenal compared to Diablo 4. In reality, I think they're both going to be a great game if you really think about it. I know there's a discussion about that amongst different content creators about what game is the best, and to be fair here, I think they're both going to be really good in their own right, especially because they're two different games, really, with different graphics anyways, because, Path of Exile 2's graphics looks insane, especially with the bear. If you have not checked it out, definitely check it out. But yeah, other than that, thank you guys for checking out the video. I kind of went off on a wild rant there, but I appreciate all the love and support, and I'll see you all in the next video.